Thank you so much for attending my PowerPoint presentation on how to play Position 2. Mid. In Dota 2, mid, which is the only position that can also be used as an insult, is the solo mid lane farming role. While the primary objectives of any given mid player varies wildly depending on the state of the game and the hero that they've chosen, the primary objective of the role is to determine the tempo of the match. This means that if your team's goal is to circumvent the enemy's power spike and end the game early, your job as a mid player is to set a very fast tempo for the game. You'll be spending the majority of the mid game spearheading engagements all over the map, acting as both an initiator and damage dealer. When it comes time to make a macro decision as the team, the support duo will look to you to determine if the goal is to accelerate the pace of the match, stall for an item timing, or go for a side objective. Now, while advancing your team's desired game state is going to be the more fun option, the alternative is to slow down enemy power spikes by using yourself as a threat. As a mid laner, you have some of the most powerful spells in the entire game, and from around 15 to 30 minutes, you are going to be the biggest threat on the map. If you insert yourself in the middle of the enemy carry's farming route, his GPM is going to tank as a result, and you can loudly announce to the enemy team that you have invaded their jungle, and they won't have many options besides just letting you do it. It's true that making space is often the objective of a mid laner, but taking space from the enemy is an equally important responsibility. The enemy team may be emotionally ready to pop a smoke and hunt your position 5 for sport across the map, but you will always represent the threat of TPing in and getting a double kill in return. Lastly, and this isn't always true depending on which hero you've picked, the position 2 often serves as an alternate win condition. This is mostly true for carry style mids like Sniper and OD, but other heroes like Lina and Ember Spirit can also have a major impact on the late game. This is an incredibly important trait because after 45 minutes your anti-mage will somehow have only a Battle Fury Manta style and a Basher, so you as the position 2 have enough agency to rip the MMR out of the enemy team's hands. Sadly, this means that you will get the most awful carry players of your life and you will reward them for being bad. But hey, at least you get the MMR too. We'll be doing a deep dive on the psychology of the mid laner fairly soon, but for now, if you're already a dedicated Pos 2, you probably know the 3 Abbeys I've put on the top right of the screen. Your first option is the protagonist of an extremely edgy anime series. Ken Kaneki is by far best in slot, but your other options include Goblin Slayer and, for some reason, Killua Zoldyck. Your next option is an edited photo of an actual Dota 2 professional player. Topson is by far the most popular pick at lower MMRs, but those with elite mid knowledge will pick even more obscure ones, like Excalibur and Yafets. Finally, we have the edgy cat girl from the Steam Point Store. There are no alternatives for this one, it's this or nothing. Now, the very first thing that you should know about playing Position 2 is that from a mechanical perspective, it is by far the hardest position to play. You better have a name brand mechanical keyboard if you're going to be playing as Pos 2, and you better be Ray fucking Lewis if you plan on doing so in any serious capacity. Not only does the 1v1 nature of the lane put by far the most emphasis on last hitting and denying effectively, but many mid heroes also have complicated kits that require great reaction times and perfect execution. Of course, there's a sliding scale to this that begins at OD and ends at Meepo, but for the majority of the match, your posture should look like that of a shrimp. Now, you may think that the 1v1 nature of the lane means that you aren't going to be splitting any gold or experience with any other hero, but this actually isn't true, because you're going to be splitting it with the guy you're laning against. You know that thing that people do in side lanes when they're winning where both heroes will attempt to deny at the same time, basically making it impossible to get any last hit and making it so you shouldn't even go for it? Well, in the mid lane, that simply isn't possible to do, meaning that in most fair matchups, every single last hit and deny is on the table and you have to earn them by your own merits. This factors into the razor-sharp laning mechanics that are required to be a competent mid player. In the side lanes, they have to worry about things like proper creep equilibrium and jungle manipulation, but in the mid lane, you have to figure out how to enforce a 2 damage advantage over your opponent. For carries and offlaners, things like starting attack animation and projectile speed are minor nuances. Here, they're everything. I might be the only Dota player who mourns for the removal of the last hit trainer, but it really was a genuinely good tool for training your laning mechanics as a mid player. There are some arcade options for you, but they just don't hit the same. Now, even when the lane is done, you still need to remain locked in order to complete your primary objective of enforcing the pace of a match. If the enemy position 1 is a Medusa and your carry is an Alchemist, you need to know which objectives to pressure and win in order to end the game as quickly as you can. Meanwhile, if the roles are flipped, you need to understand which fights to go to and which towers to sacrifice to buy enough time for your position 1 to do literally goddamn anything. To make matters worse, there are going to be times where you absolutely get destroyed in your lane, and you're still going to need to use what little you have to do your job. Of course, this ties into those razor-sharp mechanical skills that I talked about earlier. If you can't outfarm them, you have to outfight them. Lastly, your responsibilities in the late game will vary wildly depending on which heroes you picked and what you're facing on the enemy team. Sometimes your job is to completely run a team fight from beginning to end, and at other times, it's going to be stunning a Night Stalker so your supports can run away like rats. Sometimes you're the person who's going to be hitting buildings, which means you need to put a Quelling Blade in your carry's inventory in order to pick up the Aegis, and other times you're going to be putting the enemy supports down with the efficiency of a coastal chef euthanizing a lobster. One of the most underrated parts of the mid role is being able to identify and execute these responsibilities. On the bright side, you're going to have many lanes where you get harassed away from the wave after about 4.5 minutes, meaning that you will have time and nothing else. I have a Patreon linked in the description if you'd like to help me keep playing fuck games with all the gambling companies in my Discord DMs. There's a couple of different bonus videos there, including a long-form tier list whose thumbnail I'm scared to put on YouTube. And if you're already a patron, thank you very much for your continued support. Now, when it comes to the different positions in Dota 2, people often have disagreements on how they view people who play other roles. Some people view carry players as hydrogen bombs, while others view them as coughing babies. Position 4 players get slammed for either being useless stoners or goddamn superheroes, with very little in between. But when it comes to the mid lane role, pretty much every Dota player ever can agree that these guys have an ego the size of the moon. Thinking you're hot shit is basically a requirement in order to play mid effectively, and a lot of that comes from the 1v1 nature of the role. For the first several minutes of the match, you have no help, and you're not helping anyone either, meaning that the results of your matchup depend entirely on your own skills and understanding of the game. Other roles need confidence, but you need cockiness, because your goal is to walk up to that 1v1 mid laner with hate for your fellow man buried deep in your heart. You need to look across that lane and play the pathetic Queen Imperia voice line in your head in perfect FLAC quality. If you're the kind of player who's constantly second-guessing themselves and goes for the conservative option over going balls to the wall at every given opportunity, then the position 2 role might not be for you. If you think you could develop this sort of self-centeredness, but you aren't a mid player yet, don't worry. All it takes is a couple of solidly won fair matchups in order to think that you're God. And if you don't believe me, just look at the pro scene, where mid players are much more likely to leave a team rather than get kicked. Now, once you've made Sigmund Freud blush, your second responsibility is to learn every single potential mid matchup in the entire game. It's funny, but it's true, and seasoned mid veterans will have a mid lane matchup chart built in their head that would make Justin Wong's head spin. I was a mid player for only about 18 months, and I'm confident that I could sit down and deliver a 30-minute monologue about Shadow Fiend versus Queen of Pain. Now, you might be thinking that this boils down to things like HP pools and attack damage, and those are important, but believe it or not, there are stats that only mid players can see. Open up a hero page in Dota and point to where the rune control stat is. Do you see it? The mid player does. And keep in mind that that matchup chart is constantly shifting if the enemy hero decides to go for an unexpected item or ability build. The sheer quantity of information that a mid laner has to possess and utilize in the middle of a single match is a big part of why they have such an insane ego. And as much as we all hate to admit it, they've kind of earned it. Lastly, this ties into the power spike encyclopedia that every mid laner needs to be aware of. Now, you may think that this ties into the power spike encyclopedia thing that I'm about to talk about, and while it is important to know when the enemy mid laner is strong, they need to know that for every single hero in the entire game. When the clock hits 12 and his support duo waddles over with the Smoke of Deceit, that mid laner needs to know exactly how strong both of his supports are relative to the enemy support duo. He needs to know this for every single item that both offlaners are going to pick up, and he needs to know when both carries are going to come online. While mid laners are extremely self-centered, they are oftentimes more than willing to allow the transfer of power from themselves to their position 1, and many of them will be counting down the seconds until they get to do that. Combine their power spike knowledge with their matchup chart and their insane ego, and you realize that mid players are not actually high school football jocks. In fact, they are anime student council presidents, the kind that can send you to jail for some reason. Now, if all of this sounds appealing to you, or you would like to perform the Dota equivalent of mutual masturbation with a stranger for 9.5 minutes at a time, here are some heroes to get started playing mid. The first option is everyone's favorite little sippy cup, Dragon Knight, who I highly recommend at lower MMRs when other players will attempt to steal mid from you and you wind up having to play offlane. This hero has a fairly balanced matchup spread, and his innate regen and armor make him pretty good at tanking enemy harass. His Q allows you to practice using your spells to both secure last hits and harass the enemy laner at the same time, which is a fundamental skill that all mid laners need to develop. His high damage makes it fairly easy to last hit and deny, and at 6 minutes you can bonk them with your stun and walk to the power rune as a rudimentary display of rune control. If you want something a little bit more exciting though, I can recommend Queen of Pain. She has a built-in blink which gives her great mobility and rune control, and she has not one but two interesting builds that both involve interacting with the enemy mid laner. In some matchups, you're going to be putting points in Dagger in order to harass the enemy mid laner as much as you can, while in others you're going to be maxing out Scream of Pain to make the most of your farming and ganking potential. Her ult is a massive AoE pure nuke that can flip team fights in the blink of an eye, and she has plenty of solo kill potential to help you start building up that ego early. But let's say you want to dip your toes into the mid lane, but you're absolutely terrified of being a lower level than the enemy hero at 10 minutes. In that case, I can strongly point you to Outworld Devourer. This hero wins the vast majority of his mid lane matchups by putting the enemy in gay baby jail and denying range creeps right in front of them. He's quite lacking when it comes to mobility, but he makes up for it with an insane amount of consistent pure damage, and just like Queen of Pain, he can hit the R button to win a team fight. And speaking of high impact ultimates, we also have Pangolier as a more spicy option. With both vector targeting and steering controls during his ultimate, he's a lot more mechanically complicated than these other heroes. However, a skilled Pango player can run teamfights like nobody's business, and while you do have to earn your mid lane matchups, you have plenty of solo kill potential and surprisingly good rune control. You'll be taking on the mantle of a hero that is both loved and loathed by pro players in equal measure, and if the enemy team picks Bloodseeker, for the love of God, learn how to cancel your ultimate. I wrote a little bit about how the mid lane role has changed over the past few years. Feel free to read it if you like. So now that you've committed yourself to learning the video game equivalent of how to fistfight in a psych ward, here are some tips and tricks to help you get started as a mid player. First, your ego will eternally demand that you TP right back into the tier 1 tower after getting solo killed and ganked 3 times in a row, but there's a lot of merit in learning when to concede lane. Some matchups are cheeks, but others are straight ass, and it's important to cut your losses if you know it'll lead to a better game state later on. Choosing the peaceful route, which involves ganking the enemy carry 3 times in a row, is always going to be more productive than feeding the enemy pause 2. Don't worry too much about your wounded pride. You can heal it by killing him in a teamfight 25 minutes later. The second tip I have is to begin learning some funny ward placements, not just for your own lane, but for the mid game as well. In an interesting reflection of how carries need to know stack and pull timings, you as the pause 2 should have the second best knowledge of the vision game on the team after the pause 5. In an ideal setting, you'll have the third best after your position 4 as well, but we all know that those guys don't buy wards. Keeping a sentry and an observer in your backpack will let you set up ganks on the enemy carry later on when he's trying to recover in his jungle, advancing your game state while hindering the opponent's. It's not necessarily the first thing you should be focusing on, but being able to influence the vision game is what separates the great mid players from the good ones. And lastly, replay reviews become so much more powerful when you're attempting to get good at mid. Yes, every role can learn quite a bit from watching their own games, but mids have the most to gain thanks to potential laning stage optimizations and retrospectives on their own rotations. Watching replays will also help you develop a much better game sense for when you're about to get ganked in the lane, and you can steal all of those interesting wards that you see supports on both teams putting down. Making this easier is whenever you get a solo kill, you'll want to download the replay just so you can show all of your friends. In conclusion, mid is an intricate role, and you should absolutely play it. If you play any other position and notice that your mid game always starts like shit, go ahead and pick up the mid lane role and see just how hard it really is to create a half decent game state for everyone else on the team. Peace on planet Earth.